Welcome to Turn Your Designers into Death Stars. I'd like to share with you 1.5 stories that served as the inspiration behind this talk. So I am a senior developer advocate at Udacity, and a few weeks ago we were doing a Google design sprint, and I showed up in the middle of it for the prototyping phase. So on Wednesday, we were going to take the designer comps and turn them into prototypes so that we could do user testing on Friday. And so I asked our product manager, what would you like to see on Friday? And she said, well, it would be really nice if we took these comps and the users could actually click through them. So in other words, taking static comps, putting them in the page and allowing the user to just click through these. And so I'm thinking, well, what are we going to do for the other 47.5 hours? Scott Moss, who works with me, we're kind of looking at each other like, are you going to say something or do you want me to say something? And so I raised my hand. I said, look, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but what would you say if, or how would you feel about us just actually building these comps out? And the response was pretty much like this. I know there's a joke in there somewhere. So anyways, very incredulous about my proposal. Anyway, Scott and I set up some basic routes, a basic project, put the comps in. 20 minutes later, we've already met our objective. But using Angular material, we were able to work with the designers, the developers, and even some of the product managers got in on the fun, and were able to build out a super high fidelity prototype. The end result is the feedback that we got from the students and users on Friday was phenomenal, far better than they ever expected. At the same time, some would say perfect timing, I say kind of creepy. Brad Green reaches out to me about a vision that he has about a world where designers play a greater role in the development cycle. And so we're talking about this, and as we start to imagine this world where designers are making contributions and helping create Angular code and affect the end product, he gets super excited and he says, I basically want to take designers and turn them into Death Stars with Angular. And so this is the title of the talk. So the big idea is this. We need to make designers first-class citizens in Angular. Organizations gain an incredible competitive advantage by being able to evolve and iterate faster than everyone else. Angular allows us to create things with unprecedented speed. But I still feel like we are leaving a lot of opportunity on the table by not having a tighter integration between designers and developers within the development cycle. By tightening up that feedback loop, I believe that we can actually capitalize on a lot of opportunity that otherwise would go unrealized. There's 3 components to this as I see it. First and foremost is mindset. We need to address the mindset that exists in most organizations that I've seen. Usually there's a traditional kind of arrangement that is kind of like a high school prom, if you will, that you get your designers and they line up on one side of the gym, you get your developers, they line up on the other side of the gym, and everybody's kind of afraid to talk to each other, much less slow dance. So we need to, first and foremost, talk about the mindset that kind of creates that chasm between designers and developers. From there, we can enable designers to play a more meaningful role in the development cycle by teaching them some Angular techniques. And once we've laid that foundation, then we can put some really powerful tools in their hands to amplify that effort. So let's talk about mindset. This is kind of where it all starts, and I find that most dysfunctional organizations, the dysfunction doesn't come from the technology stack that they're using, their IDE that they've chosen, their ability to embrace agile. It's a systemic problem with some worldview that they have. And so first and foremost, let's talk about why we need designers. The answer to this question, why do we need designers, is actually multifaceted, and I believe that there are answers that offer something for everyone. First and foremost, and most importantly, let's talk about the end user. I believe that we do what we do because we derive a huge intrinsic satisfaction from creating things that people love. So Don Norman, who is a user experience juggernaut, he's written some seminal works in this field, is in the book, Emotional Design, he makes the case that attractive things work better. And so just as a bonus, he's actually put the first chapter of this book for free on his website. Because I heart you, I have included this as a bonus link. Total side point. The reason why attractive things work better is because you cannot separate how you feel about something from how you think about something. If you think poorly or you think negatively about something, invariably you will feel negatively about it. The converse is true. If you feel positively about something, invariably you will think positively about it. Just a pro tip is I've never put something in front of a stakeholder and they've wanted to actually go through it line by line, is that their response is, how does this make me feel? What is my impression of it? So a little polish goes a long ways, which hitting a home run with a stakeholder is one step in many of creating shorter development cycles. So now we're talking about something for our product managers and our stakeholders. By tightening up that feedback loop of here's the design, here's the development artifact from it, and iterating back and forth, creating a tighter feedback loop, you can produce your end product faster. And in conjunction with that is not only do you get a tighter feedback loop, which creates a shorter development cycle, you get a better allocation of effort. So Angular, the views are just HTML and CSS, which I believe because of that, Angular is the best framework to solve this problem. I personally get super frustrated when I have to do complex CSS layout. It feels like I am drunk driving most of the time. I think I'm totally okay to get behind the wheel, and come to find out, I actually am not even capable of walking a straight line. This happens all the time for me. But by bringing designers into the flow, I'm able to leverage their skill set and offload pieces of work that better fits their skill set. And speaking of designers, by bringing them into the fold and making them gatekeepers, we get a higher quality of a deliverable. I don't know about you, but I've offended my fair share of designers because I built something and it was 3 pixels off. Or maybe I didn't nail the particular shade of fuchsia that they were going for. And so by empowering them to be gatekeepers and say, actually, we need to change this, or even giving them the ability to change it as it goes out the door, you are going to get a better, higher quality deliverable. And so first and foremost, I think we have to adjust our mindset for how we view designers and developers. We've been to organizations where I've seen plenty of times where the designers are on a totally different floor, sometimes they're not even in the same building. And so back to the high school analogy is we really want to create a situation where people are slow dancing. So the next step to that, to creating that shorter development cycle, better allocation of effort, and higher quality deliverables is to introduce techniques that designers can use. So Taro gave an excellent deep dive yesterday morning. This is going to be the exact opposite of that. We are going to have a just put your foot in the water dive. So I propose that we teach them just enough Angular to be effective. If a designer can do layout, the amount of Angular that a designer needs to know is actually astonishingly low, incredibly small. I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. As Angular developers, we understand this, that everything is essentially an object with properties and methods. Angular does an excellent job of separating our declarative markup and our imperative logic. I don't recommend actually using those words when talking to your designers. You'll probably scare them off. But what you can say is that HTML is a representation of some object. So if you have a user that you're displaying in HTML, that's actually a representation of an actual user object. And so by training our designers to see the object behind the HTML, you've already kind of crossed that first step to making them effective Angular developers. So what is just enough Angular? This is not a list that I would get into a fist fight over. You know, if somebody said, hey, something else needs to be on there, I don't agree, I'd say, totally awesome, accept pull request. But I wouldn't get in a fight about this. But I believe this is a good first step for introducing somebody who's never seen Angular or a designer to the framework. So with the mindset or the agreement that everything is an object, you need to show them simple data binding syntax and say that I have an object with a property, I can bind to that. You can take that a step further and say I have an object with properties, I can actually bind to individual properties on an object. So now we are establishing that one-way relationship from the JavaScript object to the HTML view and seeing it rendered. The next step is let's create that two-way relationship with ngModel. And so adding in a text input, ngModel equals some property. For some reason, I'm always amazed at how impressive it is to actually have an input field. And when you actually start typing, something else starts changing in the page. It still kind of gets me sometimes. But the first time I touched Angular and I was like, this is all I have to do, ngModel, you know, double curly braces, and it works. It's pretty impressive. So ngModel allowing the designer to actually manipulate a property in real time in the browser is pretty, I think it's, for me, empowering. Then you can take that a step further and actually bind to properties on an object. So you can have multiple text input fields. And an astute designer will actually stop and say, this looks like we're actually starting to build out a form. And that is correct. That's where we're leading them to, is using ngModel and binding to a JavaScript object, you can start to build out forms that accepts input. From there, ngRepeat is if you can lay out one object, you can lay out n objects using ngRepeat. And if you really wanted to show off, so classify this under party trick to impress your friends, you can add in, with your ngRepeat, an extra input field with ngModel, and then filter your list on that. So that's pretty much going to be a mic drop moment in your relationship. Is it's so incredibly easy to filter a list with ngRepeat and ngModel. From here, I will show them how to capture user input using ngClick. I find that this is probably there are other ways to interact with Angular, but this is the one that I generally stick with for simplicity. And I may even pre-write some of the JavaScript functions that this would call. But my experience is that most capable designers are comfortable writing simple setter methods in JavaScript once you show them how. Then I will show them how to actually manipulate page layout using ngIf. If this condition is true, show this element. At which point we have all the raw material for a Death Star. But if you really, really want to dial this in and put on the super death ray laser, then I will show a designer how to use simple states within their application using UI router. Let's be clear. UI router is incredibly powerful, and I'm not advocating taking your designers down that rabbit hole. What I am advocating is that showing a designer how to set up a simple route with a URL and a template URL is quite reasonable within the realms of expectation that allows them to click from state to state to state within their application. So I'm freestyling right now. I actually really enjoyed Aaron's talk this morning about bridges and building bridges. And speaking of bridges, I became a fan of Jeff R. a few months ago when somebody sent me an online tutorial that he put together called LearnRx. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend Googling it right now, LearnRx, where he walks the user through how to build 5 JavaScript functions like map, reduce, filter, etc. from the ground up, and you kind of walk through and you get these kind of feedback loops as you complete a function, then you can move on to the next one. He actually gave a talk where he was able to use that within Netflix to show like 60 engineers the basics of functional programming within JavaScript. So using that as an inspiration, I have created a bridge of my own. So if you go to this link here, bit.ly, ng-designers. Now, to be clear, this may be a rope bridge right now, and I will certainly iterate it as I get more data points. You will go to this link right here where I have 6 plunks that are numbered. So we have, believe it or not, sequentially, according to the list that I just showed you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now what we have in here are simple plunks that you can give to your designers. And so the end goal of this is for them to start at plunk 1, go through plunk 6, and to have a kind of an understanding of the basics of Angular when they complete that. So we start out with simple data binding, and I'm showing that by declaring this property, this.hello world, the binding syntax, this is what it renders. Now, I get a lot of pressure, peer pressure, from my friends who really like to live code. It's not really my thing, but you know, Martin's over here giving me the stink eye. So do you know what? I'm going to live code right now. So I'm just going to let that run. We'll see what happens. This may or may not work according to the internet. See, this is why I don't live code. Are you happy, Martin? You've ruined my career. So we will come back to this. The point being that now we have these you can walk through, and remember when I talked about updating a text field and you would see it in the browser. We've seen it a million times, but for someone who's never seen it, imagine in that context being able to go here and see this laid out in a very simple, easy to digest format. And at the end of each one of these is a challenge that you can give your designer. So in this case, add a new property to the item object and then add a text field. So they can go right over into the code, add it, And then the minute they hit save, they can see it. And so we just go through here, and we have one for each of these concepts that I talked about. So ng-click, we have, for instance, ng-if, where I can click and I can toggle these things. And then I'm showing the code, and I'm offering commentary. And then there's a few ones where I have actually a bonus where I talk about if you're toggling an element, you can actually toggle a class. And so that's where kind of these muted buttons are coming from. And then last but not least, we have simple states where I show in the code what a simple state looks like and how to actually set that up. So we have 6 plunks with commentary and a challenge at the end for a designer to go and try out this concept and actually kind of form their own opinions and play around with it and try new things. And so that is techniques. I believe those 5 things: data binding, ng-model, ng-repeat, ng-click, ng-if. And if you're feeling ambitious, simple states, you can get a lot of layout done with just those 6 things. So with that foundation in place, let's get to my final point: tooling. You and whose army? Well, I think everybody would agree, and I've heard this multiple times, the Angular community is incredible. From day one, ever since I started writing Angular to this very minute, I continue to be impressed by the community. And these are some of my favorite tools that I use every day that I think are exceptionally well suited for designers. So material design by itself makes me swoon. I think it's gorgeous. Angular material is the stuff that dreams are made out of. And so if you haven't checked it out, there is a ton of great documentation in the site, in the project, that you can go, you can see how it works, and you can take it a step further by actually clicking and seeing code pens in the browser that you can actually start to play around with immediately. Side note, I think there's nothing wrong with SDD, that sample code driven development. I have written more than one application by copying sample code and composing it into something that was workable. Material design is a perfect candidate for that. UI Bootstrap, I love it because most everyone knows Bootstrap. And so having a set of Angular directives that hooks into that world is incredible. Again, if you know layout, you're already like 90% there. This just takes it even a step further. And the company that I want to marry, Drifty. These folks put out so many ridiculous tools, it's mind-boggling. It's absolutely nutty. Like, if I could have 10 lifetimes to talk about how rad I think this company is, it might not be enough. So the one that is exceptionally pertinent to this discussion is Ionic Creator. This allows the user to actually drag and drop, do their interface, click a button, and it exports a fully functional Cordova project with working Angular code. So generate, click, boom, done. You have a project. So this is, I believe, in closed beta right now. It will be opened very soon, but keep your eye out for this. It is incredible. One last thing I would like to bring up, because I mentioned Brad from the beginning, is this is not only something that I take very seriously and personally. This is not just a personal vision to me, but this is something that Brad and the Angular team are very committed to. And because of that, him and I have actually started to reach out to contacts within various organizations that have applicable tooling. So to give you an example, we've reached out to Adobe, we've reached out to InVision, I just had an email thread this morning with the folks from Framer.js, and I cannot make any promises. But at the same time, as we are working very hard to not only build bridges to the community, but to build bridges to these companies that are building awesome tools that designers love to create those integration points so it's easier to go back and forth. I'm incredibly excited about where Angular is headed. I'm even more so excited when I imagine a scenario where designers and developers are working closely together to build amazing things better and faster. And so the obligatory Angular 2.0 plug is everything that I've said here actually becomes simpler in Angular 2 because the surface area of the framework is being reduced with the new reduced kind of binding syntax that is going to be in the new framework. So with that said, check out my blog, onehungrymind.com. I will post all of the resources and links, slides, etc. here. I appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of the conference.